Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Sitting in a Car podcast. I'm Sarah Sproul, and I sit in a car and answer parents' questions about sex. You and I sit in a car together every week and talk about how to raise a confident and caring young person who respects themselves and the people around them. And the question for this week is, how do we explain our own sex lives to the kids? Great question. I remember a few years ago, I was reading the bedtime story to one of my kids, and they must have had a conversation with someone at school, because this evening, this child said to me, Mum, what is oral sex? And now I feel comfortable answering the question, so I answered the question. I said, well, that's sort of something people do when they really like each other, and it's to do with their genitals and usually people's mouths. And he was like, what? Mouths on genitals? And I went, yes, mouths on genitals. And he was like, oh, that's gross. And I didn't say anything. And then he said, have you done that? And I went, yes, I have. And he says, how many times? And at that point in the conversation, I realized I didn't want to say anything else. So I said, I actually don't want to tell you that. Some things I like to keep private. And that was the end. I think he might have said, oh no, tell me. And I just said, I'm not going to tell you, that's my own private stuff. So when we are asked to talk to our kids about our own sex lives, there are a few different factors you need to take into account. The first one is your partner, if you're still with that person, happy for you to talk about these sort of things with your kid? Because if your sexual relationship is with the partner that you are currently with, then they have sort of a say over how much information the children you live with have. So there's a consent issue there, first of all. The second point is that there's a difference between answering your kids' questions about your own life and volunteering information to your children. Now, of course, I am always in the business of making sure our children and young people have a lot of accurate information that will enable them to make good decisions for themselves as they get older. But that doesn't necessarily mean coming to them and volunteering information about your own life if they didn't ask for it. So that's a boundary issue. Do your children or young people want to hear the information? Now, in my story, my child absolutely did want to hear that information, but not every child or young person will want to. Then the next thing is, do you want to talk about it? Just because they ask you a question doesn't mean you need to talk about your own personal stuff. So in my story, I felt comfortable enough talking to my young person, my child, actually, they were probably 7 or 8, about that. But not everyone will, and that's absolutely fine. This is an issue of consent to do with yourself. We don't talk about consent very often in terms of our parenting. Well, we do here on Sitting in a Car, but in the general world, we don't generally talk about it very much. But our relationship with our children is a relationship like any other, where issues of consent are important. And it's not just about our children's consent and what they want to do, but it's also about our consent and what we want to do. And for you need to decide whether you want to answer the questions about your own personal sex life. And a lot of you may not, in which case then you say, I like talking about relationships and it's important for you to get lots of information, but I don't want to talk about my own relationship because for me, that's private. Not everybody wants to share those things, and a lot of people do as well. And that's just my choice. You might grow up to be a person who likes to talk about that sort of things with your friends and your kids, but I'm not one of those people. All right. So that's where you're noticing what your boundary is, whether you feel happy enough to talk about your own sex life. And if you don't, you don't shame your kid about it. You don't make them feel bad for asking the question, because they have a right to ask questions. We all have a right to ask questions, but you have the right to not answer the question. The other thing might be worthwhile talking about is the fact that not every intimate relationship actually has sex. So it could be that the relationship you're in very rarely has sex anymore, if it ever did. You may be an asexual person and you are raising children, but you don't have sex with your co-parent or your partner. And that's something that you can mention to your kids too. You can say, if they're asking you, so do you have sex with Joe or Dad or Mum or whatever the question is, you can take the opportunity to say, not every relationship has sex in it. And then if you feel comfortable, you can say, and ours is one of those relationships that doesn't, or you can just leave it and not say anything about your own personal stuff. All right, so what a great question. The question was, how do we explain our own sex lives to the kids? And that's sitting in a car for another week, where I've answered your question to help you raise a confident and caring young person who respects themselves and the people around them. Bye for now.